Six things I've learned in my 20s. And today I'm going to tell you all about it. And I'll caveat this by saying I went through a lot of trials and tribulations in my 20s. It's like a whole can of worms, just like everyone else. But I thought to share as I kind of weaved my way towards the end of my 20s, towards my 30s, to share my thoughts on many different things. But six things come to mind. And I call these the six Ds: discover, direction, discipline, differentiation, depth, and distribution. So let's start with the first D. The first D is discover. As you probably know, in your 20s, it's really a process of discovery. You start your 20s in college or university for most people. You kind of waddle your way through. You don't really know what the fuck you're doing, but at the same time, everyone's kind of following the same trajectory, right? It's like everyone has this set path that they go on. They get an education, they go on to the next institution, get another certificate, and then you go on to the next one, and again, until finally, by your early 20s, you finally graduated the final institution of knowledge, the college, the university experience, and all of the social tribulations that come with that. Now, it's going to be a bit more difficult because once you leave your 20s, you have this very structured progression of life that becomes a lot less clear. And you have to make decisions where there's no clear answer. And I think that's kind of the difficult part a lot of people struggle with, including myself. Because you just have so many choices. You can go into banking, you can go into finance, you can go into technology, you can go into law, you can become a cook, you can start your own YouTube channel. There's a ton of different things to do, and everyone kind of just, you know, it's interesting because everyone up to their early 20s, they kind of just go along the same path, right? Everyone just kind of goes along the same track. But at some point, after college, after university, everyone kind of just spreads out like a butterfly, or my fingers, into many different pathways, right? And if you look back, 5, 10 years from that moment, you realize that some people are doing really well by traditional metrics, and some people are doing terribly. And you have everything in between, and outliers as well, and the wacky ones. So my point is, your 20s is a process in discovery. You're supposed to fail. You're supposed to make mistakes. You're supposed to fuck things up really, really badly. And I think the more you're willing to lean in to the fuck ups, to the messy in betweenness of everything, the better you're off. Really, it's almost like having a job right out of college and not knowing anything, and no one expecting you to know anything, and you have this amazing permission to really just fuck up, really, right? Because there's no expectation. So, especially within your first month, nobody expects you to know everything or anything, really, especially if it's your first job. So, if you can take advantage of that moment in time, and that moment in time really applies to your 20s in the grand scheme of life, to really fuck up and mess around and just lean in to all the different things that you can possibly do, all the different things that you can possibly like, the better off you'll be. Because the reality is that nobody knows what they want. So to really, really understand who you are as a person and what you like, what you dislike, what you tolerate, and the people you hate, you have to experiment. And experimentation is hard because it requires you to do something new, something out of your comfort zone. And the reality is that all of us have like a bubble of comfort zone. And that gradually expands over time as you push yourself to do new adventures, different things. But if you don't actually do that, then You kind of stay in that bubble of comfort. And that's something different for everyone else. Some people might find comfort at the pubs, at the bars, drinking their nights away with the mates every single day. Some people like to stay at home and play video games and watch movies. Some people stick out with the last, maybe the same few friends they had since college. And they never really grow out of that bubble. And what I'm challenging you to do, and what I challenge myself to do, and I went through a lot of this, I don't know, uncertainty, especially in my early 20s, is really having the ability to keep an open mind. To understand that doing new things is really scary and really frustrating. But one thing I kind of maybe challenge you to kind of think about is you want to look at it as a regret minimization framework. We are all going to die one day. That's a guarantee. You, me, everyone. And Jeff Bezos had this great idea, and it's called the regret minimization framework. So if you project yourself to age 80 and think back about the life you have lived, how do you live a life that minimizes the number of regrets that you have? And for him, he was, I think, 30 at the time. And he kind of did this exercise in himself. He projected himself to age 80. And he thought back to his life and said, if I don't start Amazon, if I don't quit my fancy, juicy finance hedge fund job and start, a career in, I don't know, tech or this new frontier of Amazon.com, would I regret it when I'm age 80? And for him, the answer was obvious when he projected himself to age 80. It's like, if I had never done it, I would have never known if this was something that was good for me, or if I could do it. I would always have that FOMO, that sense of, ugh, should I have done this? Would this have changed my life? And if he continued on his current path, the typical trajectory of getting, I mean, he already had a good job. He can get a good job, buy a bunch of houses, enjoy life, get a bunch of kids. A very normal, typical life with a lot of luxury in between. Would he have regretted his life? And for him, that was yes. And for me, that moment was when I was in the UK and I was deciding between staying in the UK and moving to the United States. And for me, when I projected myself to age 80 and thought back, I thought I would absolutely regret it because I would never have known what it was like to live at the other side. But if I've experienced both the left side and the right side, I kind of know both. And maybe I do know the grass is greener across the Atlantic Ocean, or maybe it wasn't. But the point is, I actually know, and I have the experience to kind of understand the pros and cons, at least, of both places, and understand what me as an individual, what I like, and perhaps what I value and what I can tolerate with. So I think discovery is always the big part of your 20s, but it's also difficult because if I wind back for myself at least 10 years ago, it was just so much head talk, right? Something I call head talk. It's just really, you're just so much in your head. You just think so much of, oh my God, what's this person gonna think of me? Oh my God, I'm like that absolute idiot. You're gonna replay that moment, that interview that you just fucked up, and you're just gonna be like, oh, I could have done this in a different way. I should have done this. I should have done that. And I guess it can be considered as social anxiety or social inconfidence. And it's not just that, right? It's just that you really have no clue what the fuck you're doing. So you just keep doing like a bunch of different stuff. And I found that the more I lean into it, the more social conversations I put myself in, the more interviews I put myself in, the more presentations I gave, the less I gave a fuck, right? So my point is, if you could do 1,000 of these presentations, challenge yourself to do 1,000 of the things you hate, but you know are valuable, like being able to talk to strangers, being able to give a presentation in front of 200 people. If you can do that well, and well, I mean, well after doing it 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and you think that makes a meaningful change of your life, it's worth sticking true. And I've been through that myself. Um, it's a very painful journey, right? Because you, at least for me, I didn't really have the luxury of having someone to share that with, and I didn't really have the vulnerability as a man to kind of share that with someone else, to say that, hey, I'm actually not very good at this, and I kind of have to work through that, right? I kind of work through that in isolation, by myself. And if you have someone on the same journey as yourself, simple friends, family, partners, it's amazing, and you should let them know. You should be vulnerable, right? Because I guarantee you, a lot of them have been through the same thing, and the good friends will understand, and the bad friends will ridicule you for trying to do this. And those are the friends you know that you should not keep, right? And another big thing is of discovery is really discovering the friends that you want to keep and the partners that you want to have, right? What are the values that you have in life? How do you view money, family, relationships, and all these different things? So I think that it's very important to make the discovery early because you don't want to be in a situation when in your 30s and 40s and you still don't really know what you want. You're still putting yourself in situations where you feel that I'm not really getting any value out of this. You force yourself to go to half a dozen social functions and you don't really give a shit or care about the people there. And you kind of force yourself to do that because you don't really know what else to do with your life. And not to say you can't do that in your 30s and 40s, but it's just a lot easier if you front load the pain and suffering and agony to your 20s, especially your early 20s. Because those, in my opinion, are the formative years of your life. And the more suffering you're willing to put yourself through in the early years, the more benefits you'll see in your later years. It's like planting a seed, planting an apple tree right now, right? To use the old cliche. If you plant an apple tree right now and you can see the results in, 20, 30 years, but if you put yourself through the suffering as a human being right now, you can see the results in 5 to 10 years. You'll be completely unrecognizable in 5 to 10 years. I guarantee you that. Because I've been through that same process myself of being really, somewhat of a, I guess, too smart for my own good kind of individual to somewhat being somewhat more well-rounded. And I think you really want to be in a position where you're not trying to accommodate to all the different people in your life. You want to be true to yourself and find what is true to yourself, but also have a bit of empathy of what other people are going through as well, right? So I think one thing I really discovered was really the empathy for other people because everyone's going through something in their lives. They might not tell you, but you know they're going through something. And the key to forming strong relationships, and that's also a big part of discovery, is really having that empathy for what someone else is going through, right? Because a lot of the times in your 20s, you're afraid to kind of dig a bit too deep. You're afraid to be too vulnerable. But really, as you kind of go through like 1,000, 10,000 conversations, like I mentioned before, you really stop giving a shit, right? And you're going to meet so many people. Most people you're not going to be friends with. But if you can kind of expose yourself to be a bit more vulnerable, especially when you meet someone new and maybe test the waters, because I love the conversations myself, and not everyone likes to go into that. And some people kind of have this bubble in their head, right? They don't really want to have that conversation because they know if they had that conversation, it would open up a ton of worms, a ton of loose ends, and they don't really want to deal with that. But the more you can make yourself vulnerable, and the more you can show that first step, what I find is that if you show that first step of vulnerability, of saying that, hey, I'm actually a human being, I'm weak, I'm not perfect, I'm not AI, the more the more people are willing to lean in with you, right? If you can take that first step, and that's not a good thing about discovery, is that it kind of forces you to realize some of the aspects of your habits and characteristics that are lacking. So, like for me, taking initiative was one of the big things I learned, right? Because when you lose the structure of your college and university, you kind of lose the structure of serendipity of meeting people organically. When you do your 9 to 5 and then you go home, you cook, and you go to the gym, you kind of lose that serendipity of meeting new people, and you find yourself having to consciously make a decision that, hey, I want to meet you, I want to get to know you better. And because of that, I'm going to set aside time on Saturday to get coffee, to get brunch with you, right? And that's something that you have to do after college, after university. That's something that is a skill, taking initiative, right? So if I had to summarize, and I kind of ramble on for a bit, hopefully this was useful in some sense. Take the initiative. Don't be afraid to fail. Do a ton of discovery on yourself, and then lean in into the person you are. You will change over the many years, but write it down. Have a bias for action, and you won't regret it. All right. Hope that was useful.